Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. It's good to see everybody. Come on in. So we're gonna let some folks roll in. While we do, I'll just say happy spring to all of you. I changed my background because it's so beautiful out and I'm knocked off my feet by poppies all over the place and other kinds of wildflowers. So I hope you're having a lovely spring wherever you're at. This happens to be the North Fork of the American River. So I decided I'm going to showcase our beautiful state as we do these meetings every month. So hello, everybody. I see more and more folks joining. Go ahead and introduce yourselves over chat. Just tell us where you're coming from and what organization you're with. Tell us what kind of wildflowers are happening in your neck of the woods. All right, so this is the 18th meeting of the California Climate and Energy Collaborative. We're super happy to have you back. And as always, we would love for you to turn on your webcam if you're comfortable doing so. We'd also appreciate it, like I said, if you could just briefly introduce yourself in the chat. Let's go into our next slide. We've got a packed meeting today. So I'll start with my intro. I'm Angie Hacker. I'm the statewide best practices coordinator for the California Climate and Energy Collaborative, joined today by other members of the SEEC team, Kelsey, John, and Tila. They're going to introduce themselves over chat as well. As always, these 1 hour meetings are designed to provide a space for local governments and those that work with them to dive in on programs and opportunities that can help them advance their energy and climate goals. So we hear all the time how busy you are, so you can come here and get the latest on the timely opportunities that are right for you. So today's another chance to do that. We are featuring 2 speakers today. We've got Emily Dalecki with the National Renewable Energy Lab, so NREL, and another presentation from Kassandra Grimes from the Department of Energy. So a couple programs to share with you alongside our opportunity roundtable and some stuff to chat with you about at the very end in the DPC workshop. So we invite you to stick around for this full hour. We've got some questions for you at the end. All right, next slide, please. So it's another busy month here in California and across the nation. As always, this slide deck is not built to be the most beautiful thing in the world, but it's more like a hyperlinked cheat sheet. So you can dive in further on these opportunities that you want to look at more. We're also going to be putting links on the chat as we talk through things. And as you can see, we're tracking all sorts of stuff, all the way from policy to when a NOFA is released to help locals get an advance notice of some opportunities. So as always, policy is driving investment, right? And one thing that's been sort of recent news is the release of state and federal budgets. And just a little note here on what's going on in each. It's not all bad news, but probably the worst news is that California's budget continues to struggle. So this year, earlier budgets in California included agreements to include $8.7 billion in this next fiscal year to continue activities to mitigate and respond to climate change. But in response to the multi-billion-dollar budget problem that California is facing, the governor's proposed budget is reducing the net general fund spending by $5.8 billion. So that's for, in particular, climate resources and environmental programs. So the good news is some of that's getting augmented by some federal sources, but it is a cut. The biggest categories of spending in that budget that we're seeing right now before the May revise are zero emission vehicles, energy, water, and drought. And then the Biden proposed budget, it builds on what has been a good few years in terms of federal spending in clean energy and climate science, focusing in on environmental justice, trying to do more in terms of putting America first in global climate leadership. So this president's budget includes $52.2 billion in discretionary budget authority. It says to tackle the climate crisis. And that's actually about $11 billion more than last year, or an increase of 26%. So like I said, not all bad news, but we knew this was coming in California. There is a letter that CivicWell is putting together if you would like to vocalize your opposition to the cuts to spending in climate, and that's something we can chat to that, or we will put a link to that in the chat. So the other opportunities I wanted to discuss, some of them are just updates to things we've been talking about. And maybe a theme is capacity building and just how many of the programs that are out there that are funding related are also just trying to make it easier to get those funds. So that's been good to see. For example, well, actually, let me go through these extensions first. So if you've been tracking some of these EPA programs, the first two at the top, I wanted to make sure if you're working on that, you know that you actually have till April 14th. It was originally April 10th. So that's the Environmental Justice Collaborative Problem Solving and Environmental Justice Government to Government Program. The other two I want to make sure you are tracking deadlines on because they're approaching is the EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. We talked about that last time. If you made the list of the metro area eligible areas, then a notice of intent is going to be due on April 28th. And the other one that's approaching on April 28th is the EECBG program. We've been talking about this for a long time. This is the DOE's formula allocation of EECBG. So if you are on that list of jurisdictions that made that cut for populations that were over a certain threshold, then the pre-award info sheet is required to be submitted by April 28th. Otherwise, you have a longer period to actually apply. But the exciting thing I wanted to share about the EECBG formula program is that the DOE and our friends, I don't know if you remember, they came to see us, Michael Forrester and others. They're doing this really great job, I think, sort of a master class in making grants accessible. So not only is this a formula grant, you don't have to compete for it, but they just came out with a whole TA website. And so it's attempting to reduce barriers to achieving clean energy and energy efficiency goals and maximizing project impact. So the TA website provides a lot of things. And a lot of it's intended to make it easier for you to submit the energy efficiency and conservation strategy required to apply for those funds. One of the things they're offering is a whole web page on blueprints, which are sort of like step-by-step guides for the kinds of eligible projects that they want to see you apply for. So it's sort of pre-approved in a way projects. And if you want to do one of those, they're basically helping to create a blueprint for you. So it's easier to replicate. Another thing that they're doing is offering field fellows. That's DOE sponsored staff that will be based in select communities to help increase the capacity and impact of these projects. So real help. Anyway, so if you are applying for those dollars, if you are eligible, I would take a look at this TA website and see what kind of help you can get. The other thing that I want to mention, it's a new program we haven't talked about before. It's the Department of Energy's Clean Energy to Communities program. There's $6.5 million there. The deadline for that is going to be May 17th, and local governments, community-based organizations are eligible. The program provides funding to help rural and metropolitan communities develop roadmaps to achieve their clean energy goals and provide support from U.S. National Laboratory staff as they apply modeling and analytical tools adapted for each community's unique conditions. I thought that was cool. This is a really good sort of capacity building. It's kind of TA in a way, but there's dollars there as well. The other thing, I just wanted to make sure you're looking out for two things coming your way soon, not yet. The Regional Resilience Planning and Implementation Grant. It's still coming this spring, but there is now an intent to apply and request for help surveys. So that just means you can fill out a survey saying, I'm interested in applying and I need some help. So this is that theme, right? These agencies providing grants want to help. And so you can actually ask for support in the preparation of these applications, which is pretty cool. The other one that's coming later on, but there's an input opportunity down a little further on the page, is draft round 2 regional climate collaboratives. So regional climate collaboratives, that was a big program. We went through round 1 not that long ago. They're prepping for round 2 and there's a draft guideline available. The comment period ends April 15th. So that's this week. And they just recently announced that they're already offering bi-weekly office hours. Again, an attempt to help way in advance, help you prepare for the kinds of projects and applications you might be submitting for the regional climate collaboratives. So get that help. And lastly, A reminder that Civic Spark is Civic Well's program that's offering subsidized support from fellows. And so you have an opportunity to apply to host a fellow by going to the link we'll put in the chat. All right, that's our fire hose. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off now and introduce our first guest. So Emily Dalecki, she's here today to present NREL's Solar Power in Your Community Guidebook. So it's housed in the DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. And she is the Market and Policy Analyst at NREL, where she focuses on state level policy analysis, community solar and residential rooftop PV permitting, and LMI solar accessibility. So thanks so much for being with us, Emily. Go ahead and take it away. Oh, and while you are listening, feel free to throw your questions for Emily in the chat and we'll get to those next.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And we can go ahead to the next slide. We can dive right in. So thank you so much for the introduction. It's really great to be here today. As mentioned, my name is Emily Dalecki. I've worked for NREL for just over 3 years. To give you all some background, NREL is one of 17 national labs founded and funded by the U.S. Department of Energy to tackle the critical scientific challenges of our time. Specifically, NREL focuses on finding creative answers to today's energy challenges, and we have decades of focused leadership in clean energy research, development, and deployment. During my time at NREL, I primarily worked on solar policy related projects, and those include updating this guidebook from its decade-old predecessor and work related to both residential and community solar. We can go to the next slide. So now I want to give you some background on the guidebook itself, as well as the solar industry as a whole. This resource was last updated in 2011, and so much has changed in the world of solar since then. Over the past decade, we have seen hardware costs decline and installed capacity rapidly grow. The most recent data from the Solar Energy Industries Association shows an estimated 142.4 gigawatts of solar PV was installed in the United States as of March of this year. That is enough solar to power 24 million households, and that growth is not expected to slow. Our recent study from NREL and DOE, known as the Solar Future Study, has found that with aggressive cost reduction, supportive policies, and large-scale electrification, solar could account for as much as 40% of the nation's electricity supply by 2035. However, today, solar makes up about 5% of the electricity in the United States. And while that number is actually 11 times more than its share a decade ago, we will need to install substantially more solar by 2035 to help meet these decarbonization goals. And the challenge of decarbonizing our electricity sector is no small one, but communities will be integral to all kinds of solar deployment, including residential, small commercial, and community solar, all of which are discussed in the guidebook. Next slide, please. So now that you know the why, let's go over the what. So this slide just gives you an overview of the chapters included in the guidebook. We won't be able to cover all of this content today, but I do plan to highlight a few specific items that you see on this list. But what I will also say is that if any of these other topics are of interest, please do refer back to the guidebook or feel free to reach out to me directly after today's presentation, and I'd be happy to discuss these topics more with you. We can go to the next slide. I have one last background slide here, and this reviews the structure of the guidebook. So all of those topics that we saw on the last slide are included, but once those topics are introduced, we also include real-world successes from a wide range of communities that have impacted the topic or technology. You can see a map of the included case studies here on the slide. And finally, each section also includes a list of supplemental resources. So that includes reports, references, and tools that offer more information or guidance on these topics. So of course, we introduced many important topics, but we really wanted to make sure that readers would have the tools they needed to get more in-depth information on any of our discussed topics to implement these opportunities within their own communities. We can go to the next slide, please. So now I'm going to start to dive into some of the content in the guidebook. And I want to start by talking about setting solar installation targets. This is an important step in strategizing a local solar effort. And setting targets can help create momentum for a solar program. And it also helps stakeholders work towards a common goal. To facilitate effective target setting, communities can start by collecting a solar installation baseline, identify programs and policies that either support or hinder solar deployment, and identify related goals. These may be electric vehicle adoption, charging station deployment, or electrification. The guidebook goes into more detail on these and other steps, and we also feature a number of tools that can be utilized to assist in solar planning and target setting. And I will cover some of those tools on the next slide. Along with this, along with setting specific solar targets, a community should also choose where solar should be incorporated into local planning efforts. And this step really helps clarify the role that solar energy will play in achieving a community's broader goals. Some communities may choose to create a completely new solar plan, but what is more likely is that your community probably already has local plans or targets that you can incorporate solar into. Sustainability plans and climate action plans have become fairly common, and they're a great fit for solar. Others might include carbon-free targets or specific renewable energy setting targets. And I will also mention that resilience planning is also an ideal place to include solar in existing planning efforts. Solar energy can play a role in resilience in conjunction with energy storage, energy efficiency, microgrids, and smart grids if supported by appropriate system design, siting, and policies. One of the many potential resilience benefits of such an approach is reducing vulnerability to electricity disruptions, and this is simply by diversifying the generation mix. We can go to the next slide, please. So on that topic of solar planning, I did want to be sure to feature this slide, which includes a number of tools which can be utilized to assist in solar planning. These tools can help accomplish important steps in understanding your local solar landscape and solar potential in your area. Many of these tools can be utilized at multiple levels, starting from the state level all the way down to a building or system level. And they offer capabilities such as creating a solar baseline, understanding local energy demographics, and scenario planning. I encourage you to refer to the guidebook to learn more about the majority of these tools and how they can be leveraged to meet your solar planning needs for your community. We of course include a list of these tools, but we also include information on who developed the tool, a general description, and exactly how a community can use each of these tools for their own needs. We can go to the next slide, please. Another opportunity for local governments to ensure solar is accessible is to update local policies and processes, as the local legal and regulatory framework forms the foundation for building a sustainable solar market. By incorporating solar energy considerations into codes and ordinances, local governments can increase solar accessibility and deployment. Solar access and solar rights are two important topics for local accessibility. Solar access refers to the ability of a solar owner to receive sufficient sunlight to operate a system productively. Tree shading, which may cause exposure conflicts, is an example of solar access. Solar rights, on the other hand, encompasses a property owner's right to install a solar energy system. This includes prohibitions that restrict a property owner's ability to install a system, such as building height restrictions. Our guidebook contains information on what other zoning ordinance considerations are relevant to local solar deployment as well. I also want to discuss effective and streamlined local rules and regulations, as those can help reduce installation costs and can significantly increase adoption rates for solar energy. Specifically, streamlining PV permitting and inspections can allow more residences and businesses to install and operate solar panels at a faster pace. Many jurisdictions have already moved to solar permitting to an online portal. I believe that's likely required in California. And some have even moved to using an instant permitting platform such as Solar App Plus that can conduct the permit review process instantly. And that saves hours of review time for local staff and allows projects to move to installation at a faster pace. Clarity and transparency throughout these processes helps ensure that local solar can expand into underserved areas and can reduce disparities in solar adoption. Next slide, please. So moving on, a robust solar workforce is another critical pillar of developing a local solar industry. For solar installers, training programs help ensure consistent installer competency, and through increased consumer satisfaction, it can also help drive additional local demand for solar installation. In the guidebook, we cover many facets of how to develop a solar workforce, starting with incorporating renewable energy in K-12 lesson plans, high school vocational training programs, and partnering with institutions of higher education that may have renewable energy focused programs. But I especially want to highlight that solar training programs run by joint apprenticeship training committees, as well as community colleges, are well suited to build local solar workforces. They often have programs on system design, safety and maintenance, installation procedures, and more. Also, many union training programs teach solar installation to apprentices, and they offer journey upgrade classes on new and emerging technologies. Thoughtful workforce recruitment and development can help ensure that the industry is reflecting local diversity and that opportunities are widely accessible. But overall, really what we're looking for is that economic growth is reaching the areas where it's going to provide the greatest benefit. Next slide, please. One topic that you will see discussed throughout the guidebook is equity. But not only did we want to include equity in discussed topics, but we felt it was also important to discuss on its own as well. So we did that through these sections that we call solar spotlights. And this first one here is on low to moderate income inclusion in solar. Data has shown that not all communities have benefited equally from the uptake in solar deployment over the past decade. LMI households represent 43% of all US households, and they similarly account for 42% of residential rooftop potential. However, as of 2018, LMI households only represented 15% of residential solar adopters. At the same time, LMI communities typically have substantially larger energy burdens than their high-income counterparts. And what that means is that a larger portion of their income is going towards their energy bill. The median energy burden for low-income households is 8.1%, which is more than 3 times that of non-low-income households at 2.3%. Solar energy technologies can be used in combination with energy efficiency and other programs to reduce the energy burden of low-income customers. Solar can also offer additional benefits such as reduced need for bill assistance, reduced utility shutoffs, and local job opportunities. In the guidebook, we list specific strategies that can be implemented locally to ensure that LMI communities are included in local solar efforts, some of which are listed here on the slide. One example is installing solar on multifamily homes, which is something that can be organized with local housing authorities. And we also suggest that communities consider creating a solarized campaign targeted at LMI customers. And there is more about solarized campaigns in the guidebook if that is something you're not familiar with. Next slide, please. Our next solar spotlight highlights racial equity in solar adoption. Recent analysis shows that rooftop PV adoption rates are significantly lower in Black and Hispanic majority census tracts, even when controlling for differences in household income and home ownership. African American and Hispanic households are also disproportionately more likely to experience energy insecurity and utility disconnection. But local governments are in a unique position to help change this by striving for greater equity and access to solar benefits. So we present ways that local jurisdictions can help create a more equitable local solar market, some of which are listed here on the slide, and I'll just touch on a few of these now. One is to adopt specific goals to ensure racial equity. These goals should include deployment, ownership, engagement, and workforce metrics, really addressing who owns and who is benefiting economically from solar at the local level. We also encourage accounting for historical injustices. These injustices, which may include redlining and environmental contamination in communities of color, should be considered when planning new programs or policy updates, as they can still impact communities today. For example, previously redlined neighborhoods have fewer trees, higher average summer temperatures, and this leads to higher air conditioning needs and costs, as well as higher health risks. Next slide, please. So one reason that we have seen a disparity in solar adoption is due to general distrust or lack of understanding for solar adoption. Our guidebook discusses the opportunity to educate and empower potential customers through inclusive strategies, which can supplement the public's knowledge about solar energy and promote consumer confidence. Community members can be engaged using a variety of outreach activities that promote solar energy technologies. And educational materials are just one option. And if you do decide to go with educational materials, we encourage that these be developed to focus on specific topics depending on where local priorities lie. Some options are listed here on the slide, such as where energy resilience is a concern. A community might choose to highlight how solar plus storage can reduce vulnerability to electricity disruptions. For renters and households with roofs poorly suited for solar, that might mean that they're not large enough or they're too old. These educational materials might highlight other solar opportunities, such as community solar or programs that help make homes solar ready. We also encourage making these resources inclusive by making them accessible in different languages, again, sensitive to differences in motivation for solar adoption, and really tailored to the needs of vulnerable subsets within your community. Next slide, please. I would like to quickly highlight some DOE programs that may be of interest to this group. I'm sure many of you are aware of the Soul Smart program, and that program recognizes cities, counties, and regional organizations for making it faster, easier, and more efficient to go solar. That program provides no-cost technical assistance to help communities become open for solar business. And Soul Smart has many resources that highlight how to make solar accessible and affordable. Many of those resources you will, of course, see highlighted within our guidebook. Additionally, for those interested in Solar App Plus, that's a tool that I mentioned earlier, please do reach out. SB 379 actually requires California jurisdictions of a certain size to adopt an instant solar plan review and permitting tool by September of this year. And Solar App Plus is available to jurisdictions at no cost. This is a project that I work on here at NREL, and I'd be happy to share more information with anyone who is interested in that tool. Next slide, please. One last slide here before I open it up for questions. I do want to mention that we really want to hear from you. So if you end up using the Solar Power in Your Community Guidebook, or even just if you found some information in today's presentation useful, please do provide your feedback. You can send any feedback directly to me at my email listed on the screen, or you can access this QR code on the screen that would take you to a short survey. And we can go ahead to the next slide. So I know that was a lot of information in a very quick time period, and so I'd really like to open it up for discussion or questions that you may have around the guidebook. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I don't see any questions in the chat yet, and it could be that you were very thorough. And I have a couple questions, and if anybody feels inspired to raise your hand, please do. So I want to let you know this is fantastic. Thank you for being here. And we're going to add this to our resource library because there's a lot of good information in here. And I was just finding myself wondering while you were talking how you determined these critical pain points. So you're addressing a lot of these pain points, stuff that's really tough for local governments to get done. How did you figure out which ones are worth addressing? And then I want to invite folks in the chat to mention other pain points that you might be experiencing that you didn't hear about.
Yeah, that is such a great question, especially since the predecessor to this guidebook was over 10 years old and so much has changed. We really did have to evaluate what issues within the solar market were still relevant and what new issues had come up since the last guidebook had been published. So to do that, we of course brainstormed within our own team here at NREL, but we also worked with a lot of organizations. We worked with the Clean Energy States Alliance, known as CESA, WRI, IREC, the International City and County Management Association, the National Association of State Energy Officials, NLC, which is the National League of Cities, and Grid Alternatives. So we had a great list of partner organizations that worked with us to provide their input and what they felt were really the issues that were coming to the forefront and would continue to come to the forefront in the coming years.
Great, thank you. We've got a question here from Kim Springer. Great presentation and guidebook. I look forward to reading through it. Would the event of NEM 3.0 change the info in the guidebook?
That's a great question. I don't think it should change it substantially, especially since we're focusing primarily at the local level. And we do cover a variety of topics, but I do appreciate you bringing that up because we're always interested and always trying to keep this guidebook up to date as well. So we're always taking a look at policies like that to see where and how we should update the guidebook. So I really appreciate you bringing that point up.
And on a similar note, Tiffany Wise-West is asking, does this include state policy advocacy recommendations to make sure rate setting doesn't turn out like it did in California with NEM 3.0?
That's a great question. We do cover state policy a bit, but that's primarily in an appendix of the guidebook, and we don't cover a huge amount of it. So I would encourage potentially looking for other resources if that's your primary interest. We were really focused on helping folks at the community level and really creating actionable steps that could be taken at the community level. So that's another great question, and I definitely appreciate you bringing that up.
Well, great. Great questions, everybody. We'll address the NEM question in the chat. So, and thank you for also mentioning that there's some other resources out there that can help folks. So I think you're giving them a lot of good guidance here, and it sort of makes me think, what else aside from guidance? Like, what's the next steps when they want to actually take action on everything you're recommending? Do you suspect there'll be other training or TA or something following on this? You mentioned SoulSmart, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about SoulSmart, who they are, and how much help can you really get?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So we actually have a whole section in our guidebook that focuses on technical assistance. SoulSmart is just one organization that is funded by DOE, of course, and they do provide that technical assistance, which is essentially like free consulting services. It's kind of a good way to think of what TA is. TA can really be utilized at any point during the, your solar journey, so to speak. If you need assistance with solar planning, or maybe even you're planning a specific project within your community, TA can be utilized for any of that. And we highlight quite a few different TA opportunities within the guidebook. And I definitely encourage you to take a look, because we try to highlight how each of those different options can work best for you. And really, it's not like you have to choose one. You might be eligible for multiple types of technical assistance that you can utilize. So that's definitely something worth taking a look at the guidebook for, to see that. We do not personally provide technical assistance through this guidebook. But that being said, we do still have quite a bit of funding. And if you have specific questions, I definitely encourage you to reach out to me at my email here on the screen, because I can at least at a minimum point you in the right direction. If not, I might be able to provide some specific guidance and resources that might be helpful to your specific questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Emily. We didn't have a whole lot of time for Q&A for her, but she is going to hang around and try to address more questions in the chat for a few minutes. So feel free to continue to do that. And thank you so much, Emily, for sharing that great resource with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Right. So we're going to move into our next speaker. And so we'd like to welcome Kassandra Grimes, and she is a Science and Technology Policy Fellow for the Department of Energy's Building Technology Office, where she supports the goals of advancing energy efficiency and electrification solutions for commercial buildings. And one of her primary programs that she oversees is the Building Upgrades Prize, and that's what she's here to talk with us about today. So again, put your questions in the chat, and with that, Cassie, we'll hand it off to you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Angie. And thank you all for taking the time to be here today. I'm really excited to share details about this new prize program from the Department of Energy, the Buildings Upgrade Prize, also known as Buildings Up. Next slide. Buildings Up is funded by the Building Technologies Office within the DOE Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. This prize is administered by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL, and we are also working with several technical support providers through the Residential Retrofits for Energy Efficiency Program, or R2E2, and that includes ACEEE, Elevate, HR Day, and Emerald Cities Collaborative. Next slide, please. The Buildings Upgrade Prize, or Buildings Up, is a new funding opportunity available for BTO. Buildings Up is a prize designed to accelerate the deployment of equitable, widespread energy efficiency and efficient electrification upgrades in existing buildings across the country. The prize is envisioned to consist of 4 phases over approximately 5 years, subject to approvals and the availability of funds. We are currently in phase 1, or the concept phase of the prize. During this phase, we will award over $22 million in cash prizes and technical assistance to teams. Phase 1 is currently open for submissions and will close on July 18th, 2023. We are seeking 20 to 60 teams to join the Buildings Up co-opetition. And we're calling it a co-opetition rather than a competition, because we're not looking to crown a single winning team at the end of these 4 phases. Instead, we hope to see as many teams as possible move through all prize phases successfully. To address this challenge, we're going to need all hands on deck, working together and sharing our best ideas with one another to move farther, faster together. An application support bonus prize is also open now to support new and under-resourced teams to develop and submit a phase 1 application. I'll provide more details on the application support prize later on in this presentation. Next slide, please. So you might be wondering, what's the difference between a grant and a prize? Grants have a lot more steps, as shown on the left. There's a lot more paperwork requirements. You often have to negotiate over milestones, and if you change something, it needs to be reviewed by the agency that's supplying the grant. It can be a really long process. Contrastingly, prizes are structured to reward work that's already been completed. You don't have to jump through those extra hoops required of the grant process, but rather you just need to achieve the predefined goals of the prize and complete the submission package. It's faster and there are no strings attached. You get to decide how you use your prize winnings. And so for Buildings Upgrade Prize, we specifically and intentionally chose to go with the prize format to kind of remove a lot of those extra barriers of the grant process. Next slide, please. So this slide is kind of efficiency and efficient electrification 101. I think for this group here, this you probably already know all of this information, but just as that additional background for folks who may not be as familiar with the energy supply and how this is and sort of like the foundations of this prize, I'll go into this one. So let's step back for a moment and talk about why energy efficiency and efficient electrification is so important, and especially why it's so important for this prize. For those who are less familiar with the energy sector, it's essentially divided into two parts, the supply side and the demand side. The supply side is where our energy is generated. And this slide has a couple of little features on it. So I think if you hit next, it'll show something. There should be like a little arrow. Yep, awesome, great. The supply side is where energy is generated. This may be through coal-fired power plants, natural gas running directly to buildings, nuclear power, or increasingly from electricity generated by renewables. Renewable energy is generated by wind turbines and solar arrays, and it's becoming a larger share of our energy supply every day, which is so great. But this prize is not focused on the supply side. Buildings Up is focused on the demand side, or how our buildings use energy. Next. As the grid becomes cleaner and cleaner, we need to prepare buildings to be able to make use of that clean electricity from renewable sources. This means two things. One, reducing the total energy a building needs through energy efficiency measures, such as installing attic insulation and doing air sealing. Next, as well as upgrading the buildings to be able to use that clean electricity by transitioning them to efficient electric equipment, such as electric heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, and efficient electric appliances. Next slide. Buildings Up aims to address the persistent administrative, financial, social, and other barriers to energy efficiency and reducing on-site emissions from existing buildings. We have the technologies available to get there. We have efficient electric equipment like heat pumps and heat pump water heaters and building efficiency measures such as insulation and air sealing, but we need to make these technologies more accessible. Only about 1% to 2% of buildings in the country are retrofitted for energy upgrades each year, which isn't nearly fast enough to meet our climate goals. We need innovations to address the non-technical barriers, the persistent financial, social, administrative, and other barriers to improving our buildings. Buildings Up is a capacity building prize that will support teams to develop solutions that accelerate building upgrades beyond current best practices, are scalable and replicable, are built to last beyond the period of the prize. The prize is structured to provide teams with support to ramp up their solutions, but teams should be developing solutions from the start that can continue on after the prize is finished. Buildings Up also seeks to benefit underserved communities by ensuring that at least 40% of the prize benefits accrue to equity eligible buildings, their occupants, and the surrounding community. I'll talk more about what equity eligible buildings are later in the webinar, but just as a brief overview, that definition includes low and moderate income households, nonprofit and public buildings, their occupants, and surrounding communities. Next slide, please. So what can a team look like? Teams may be made up of a combination of a lot of different organization types, including community-based organizations, non-federal government entities, tribes, nonprofits, for-profits, utilities, and other organizations. Essentially any entity other than federal government. Participating entities must be incorporated in the United States. And teams must enter phase 1 in order to be eligible to participate in future phases of Buildings Up. So that July 18th deadline is really important to be thinking about. Teams are also can also change throughout the prize. The teams don't necessarily have to be fully in place when you're initially applying into phase 1, and you can add team members, remove team members, however, things can change during the prize. So you're not completely committed to identifying all of your partners right up front. Next slide, please. Buildings Up applicants are asked to select one of 2 pathways. The first is the Equity-Centered Innovation Pathway, which will award $400,000 in cash prizes for each winning team. For this pathway, teams will commit at least 80% of their building upgrade initiative implementation on equity eligible buildings, which will be explained in greater detail on the following slide. The second pathway is the Open Innovation Pathway, which will award $200,000 in cash prizes for each winning team. For this pathway, applicants may include equity eligible buildings, but are not required to focus on them. For both pathways, teams will submit a concept for an initiative that can achieve scalability and replicability of building upgrades in a specified geographic area or a building type. This prize funding isn't going to pay for many building upgrades on its own, but it can pay for capacity building for dedicated staff in your organizations and communities to focus on developing innovative upgrade initiatives that leverage other sources of funding from federal and local sources. It can pay for community engagement efforts to understand and respond to the needs of the building occupants we hope to reach with the upgrades. Teams will also receive technical assistance to build out their concept submissions into implementation plans. Technical assistance will be provided for things like working with community partners to develop upgrade initiatives that truly meet the needs of the building occupants, rating funding from multiple sources to pay for upgrades in low-income households, connecting with and leveraging philanthropic support, developing communications materials, building an inclusive local workforce to complete the upgrades, and support to facilitate new connections and new partnerships. Each winning team will also have a regional navigator who will meet with them regularly and help guide them to the right technical assistance at the right time. Subsequent phases are envisioned to offer similar prizes to help teams pilot and implement their building upgrade initiatives. Teams selected during phase 1 will be invited to continue participating. Next slide, please. So the full equity eligible buildings definition can be found in the official rules document, which is available on the prize website, which I'll show the link for later on in this presentation. But for now, equity eligible buildings can be broken into 4 major parts. So the first is based on geographic location, and that includes DOE designated as well as climate and economic justice screening tool designated Justice 40 census tracts. And it also includes tribal lands and US territories. The second part of this definition includes affordable housing. The third includes underserved commercial buildings. And then the fourth category is what we're calling a locally defined equity eligible buildings. And the official rules document provides some guidelines, but essentially that category is intended for communities and applicants to the prize to tell us what should be considered equity eligible buildings in their area and explain to us why, because we realize that the first 3 parts of this definition may not cover all equity eligible buildings. So we want to make sure we have that opportunity for a local definition. Next slide, please. So this slide provides several examples of project types that applicants could propose for Buildings Up. For example, a community-based organization in a mid-sized town could partner with their local government to bring heat pumps to affordable housing buildings in their community. At a minimum, Buildings Up applicants must include efficient heating and cooling equipment upgrades and weatherization envelope improvements as needed in their proposed initiatives to reduce energy costs. Additional strategies can also be included, such as electric vehicle charging, solar, and more interventions. Teams may also include things like building controls and many more options. Next slide, please. In addition to initiatives that involve upgrading buildings with the minimum technologies and those additional interventions, Buildings Up is seeking innovation in overcoming challenges to scaling upgrades, such as lack of contractor and occupant familiarity with technologies, high upfront costs for upgrades, insufficient workforce to scale upgrades, lack of reach of funding and incentive programs, and inconsistent quality of upgrades, just to name a few. Next slide, please. The Application Support Prize is meant to encourage applicants who might otherwise not have the staff capacity, time, or expertise to submit a full Phase 1 submission. The primary intended competitors for the Application Support Prize are first-time applicants for DOE Building Technologies Office funding and community-based organizations representing or serving areas with equity-eligible buildings. Qualifying teams can apply for one of 50 prizes of $5,000 and 10 hours of technical assistance with our partners at Elevate to help them complete a Phase 1 submission. The Application Support Prize is open now. There are 27 prizes remaining for the final round, which closes on April 26th. So 23 prizes were awarded in the first 2 rounds, and so we're hoping to award the final 27 in this final round. So for folks who could use that application support, we really recommend getting your applications in by April 26th for this prize. Next slide, please. So more information about the prize, the official rules, and frequently asked questions are all available on the Buildings Up HeroX website, which is linked here and by that QR code. We're holding live virtual information sessions throughout this first phase. They're happening about once a month and they're posted to HeroX. And during those information sessions, we go a lot more in depth about the eligibility requirements, the evaluation criteria, really all of the information about the prize. So I encourage folks to go check those out. The past informational sessions recordings are also posted on HeroX. We're also holding training sessions for all applicants related to different sections of the application in Phase 1. Applicants are not required to participate in the training sessions or the informational webinars. Participation in those sessions will not influence your prize application or scoring. Those sessions are simply an additional resource as you're developing your concepts and your application. Everything will be posted to the HeroX website, and that's where all the registration is. So I encourage you to check that out. And the next informational webinar will be on May 4th at 11 a.m. Eastern. And I think this is my final slide. So I also wanted to share a little kind of teaser for another upcoming program that may be relevant to participants on the call today. From some of our colleagues over at the State and Community Energy Programs Office. So some of our colleagues wanted me to share that the Energy Futures Grants is a forthcoming multi-jurisdictional partnership program in, oh, I'm sorry, I lost my talking point on that. Okay, found it. Funded by annual appropriations. It's expected to support novel state, local, and tribal level approaches that encourage early action and novel methods for clean energy deployment. The Energy Futures grants will provide financial and technical assistance for multi-jurisdictional team-based projects that meet energy needs at the local level and are inclusive in elevating impoverished, disenfranchised, marginalized, or overburdened communities. The DOE Office of State and Community Energy Programs anticipates issuing a funding opportunity announcement in summer 2023. So I just wanted to give you all a heads up about that upcoming program from one of our other DOE offices. And thank you all for the opportunity to share these opportunities with you.
Well, thank you, Cassie. That was great. Man, DOE is doing some interesting work. You all are busy and I appreciate you making time. And I just want to say DOE is impressing a lot of us by trying to do some interesting things to make these dollars easier to access. So nice work out there. There is a question here from Erin from Lark. She says, the prize is great. We have a member looking to support an established community resilience hub that needs funding to add a microgrid. Could that be a fit for Buildings Up?
So I would say as long as the overall project is meeting the goals of the Buildings Upgrade Prize, which are outlined in the official rules document on that HeroX website, incorporating a microgrid would be an allowable additional strategy, but it just needs to meet that minimum technology requirement, which is for installing electric heating and cooling equipment.
We got a thumbs up from Erin. Okay, great. And I had a question. You know, I know a lot of folks that are in this call and outside this call, folks that we work with at the SPYC network all the time, that would probably have a lot of interest in this. Now I'm wondering if, because California's got a long history of doing this kind of work, community facing upgrade work. I'm wondering if it's, you know, the more experienced organizations that have been doing that work are eligible for this kind of a thing. So local, regional government led programs, if they can use these dollars to either conduct new pilots or expand programs that are working into new areas or target more support to equity eligible buildings, or do you have a preference for not established programs?
We are looking for any and all of the above. What you just outlined there would absolutely be an allowable concept. I think we're thinking that most likely we're going to get a lot of applicants at all different stages. We're likely going to have folks who are just starting out, have never done this before, and that's great. We're also going to have folks that are really experienced, like a lot of the folks on this call, who want to expand and maybe try something new with this funding. So all of those options are allowed. It just needs to be, yeah, a new initiative or a new, an expansion of an existing initiative.
All right, I hope you all are hearing that out there. I know lots of you could take advantage of it. And maybe, I don't see anybody else in the chat asking a question. Do you, Tila? Okay. Maybe my last question for you is, I just see a real strong connection with the DOE's home energy rebate programs, and wondering if you all have kind of thought about that and what you might recommend to folks like that are on this call, local practitioners, how they might use this in conjunction with what's coming out of the home energy rebate programs.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and maybe one of the $1 million questions. That is absolutely something that we're thinking about. We're keeping in touch with the folks running the home energy rebates program. Ideally, we would like to be able to provide support to help teams in the Buildings Up initiative to leverage that funding. That's part of the support that we're hoping to provide through our financing technical assistance providers. So yes, we really think that there's a great opportunity there for the teams in the Buildings Upgrade Prize to leverage that and all of the many other sources of federal and local funding available.
Yeah, well, this is great because I think we'll think about that on our end. We're trying to help think into that strategy for California. So thank you so much, Cassie, for being with us and sharing this great information. Everybody, all this stuff is going to be given to you after this meeting. So you'll have the slides and the recording if this has all gone a lot fast, and you'll have access to it. Cassie will hang on for another few minutes too if you have more questions for her in the chat. I think you've also got email addresses for both Cassie and Emily if you want to reach out afterwards. So thanks again so much for sticking with us, you guys, and being here. We've got a couple more things to take care of before we close out for today. So this is our BPC workshop portion of the meeting. And one thing we just wanted to remind you, if you haven't seen our outreach already, is that we have our early bird registration open now for our 14th annual SPYC Forum. So our next forum is wildly underway, and it's going to be a good one. We're going to be in Santa Rosa on June 13th and 14th in person. And we just want to make sure you are aware you can start registering now. If you are a local government, your registration is free, but we do want you to make sure you can get in. Go ahead and register as quick as you can. So John Artilo, was there anything else on the forum that you needed to share today? No. Okay. All right, so we wanted to share with you the results of our Learn survey. I don't know if you remember us harassing you at several meetings in a row over the last few months, asking you to submit your input on how it's going with Learn. We've been doing this for 1.5 years. And I think we are going strong, but we wanted to ask your opinion about how valuable it is to you and what we could do better. And so we want to thank those of you who submitted responses, and here's some things we learned. 75% of respondents think that Learn is very or immensely valuable. It's making some difference in their ability to be knowledgeable and access available funding opportunities. And otherwise it's somewhat valuable. And I think one person was like, no. But what we're hearing is that it's really great to know what the opportunities are and even know more about them. But it's difficult to know which grants are most relevant for their needs and really how to apply, and just how, if I'm some under-resourced or just tapped out, low, we don't have enough capacity as it is, how am I supposed to pick which opportunities are really worth my time? That's the ultimate struggle and sort of the theme, right, of today. How everybody on the outside is trying to figure out how to make this more doable. But on the inside, it's painful, and I remember it because you barely have enough time to get your work done, let alone these giant grants that come across. That could be a full-time position just to be monitoring, let alone applying for. So we get it, and we're sitting at the SPYC team scratching our heads and thinking, what can we do to support you even more? We have some ideas. And some of the ideas that came from respondents included suggesting more attendee conversation and collaboration during this call. So we can certainly make time for that. We have some ideas. More focus on how to apply, and more local grant case studies. So like today, we didn't have a local case study, but we would like to do that more often as we bring forward funding opportunities, basically showcasing who was successful in getting this in the past and how did they do it. So we heard all of that, and we want to thank you for those really good pieces of feedback. And now we have a couple of questions for you. So if we could launch the first poll, this is going to get your input on how we implement one of the things we're thinking about. So how would you prefer to have informal discussion or participant-led breakouts during our Learn call? So we're hearing you that you want more time to talk to each other. So here's some ideas. We could have the 10 minutes of our 60-minute meeting be for informal conversations or breakouts, where we can actually allow attendees to tell us, recommend, I want to break on this topic, and we can go break you out with whoever wants to join you. Or we could do that as a 15-minute optional extension on the meeting. So instead of 60 minutes, we would set aside 75 minutes, and whoever wanted to stick around for the last 15 for this kind of conversation or breakout could do that. You could say this might not interest me, or if you say other, maybe you can give us another idea in the chat. So we'll give you a few more seconds to decide what your preference is on that. So we're getting a few people answering. Thank you for that. So it's sort of, would you be willing, would you be willing to stick around for another 15 minutes afterwards for this more, give us a little more space to have a conversation. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. Oh, thank you very much, everybody. All right. So it's not a landslide, but looks like most people are interested in 15-minute optional extension. So that's cool. That's good to know. Others are, it sounds like everybody's mostly interested in this. And so we'll have to just decide whether or not it's in the 60 minutes or beyond. All right, let's do the next question. Can we get the next question going? All right. Please indicate your preference for grant. So we hear you that we want to know more about how to get these dollars. And we have some folks we can bring in that might be experts in helping, helping you figure out how to get these dollars. So what's your preference for grant writing training at Learn? Would you like to have a featured speaker once a quarter, a short tip at each meeting, an optional breakout 15 minutes after the meeting to discuss grant writing tips and tricks, or this does not interest me? We're actually just about time. Grant expert, says Nick Freeman. Yes. All right. I'm going to close this out because we're actually done with our time. Thank you, everybody. All right. All right. So featured speaker once a quarter. That's where I was leaning to. So that's, I think, manageable. We'll just have to make sure we get good speakers and experts. So we're going to try to maybe implement that in June. All right, you guys, so thanks for that. Otherwise, I wanted to tell you that you should check out our funding resources database, and we'll make sure we get that out in the follow-up materials if you forgot about it, where we have filters and you can diagnose yourself with the right funding opportunity for you with the many, many, many funding programs that we've been tracking. Otherwise, contact me anytime for individualized grant help, and you can email me. I can't spend a ton of time with you, but we could go into kind of a little conversation about what your needs are, and I can try to point you in the right direction of some programs I'm aware of. So contact me anytime for that. All right, last slide is just our thank you. Thanks so much for being with us. As always, feel free to share an invite with a friend, and we'll see you next time on May 9th. And thanks again to our speakers. Take care.